Hey everybody, welcome. Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust. I am so psyched this is finally here. It is Appomattox Campaign 160, or call it whatever you'd like. We've got a lot to cover. A lot of special events are going on. We really hope you're able to get out to some of these 160 events, and we really hope you'll check out our video series. We got Kris White behind the camera. You're going to see a lot of special guests during this series of several videos as we take you all around this part of Virginia. Now, here we are at City Point. It seems a good place to start, and there's a whole lot to talk about while we're here. Man, we could do a whole video series about this place alone, but we're going to try to summarize it here. And in order to start this, let's bring on our good friend Will Greene, co-founder of the American Battlefield Trust, prolific author, long time at Petersburg, Pamplin Park, everywhere else. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be here and what I think is one of the most beautiful places in the entire state of Virginia. City Point is the confluence of the Appomattox River, which is immediately off to my right here, and it joins with the James River just in front of us here. So this is the mouth of the Appomattox River. And City Point was not a large town, it was just a small village. The land that's around us here was owned by a man named Richard Epps, whose family had owned this property from the 17th century all the way up until 1979, when the National Park Service acquired the property. So this was just a largest plantation in Prince George County. Dr. Epps owned over 130 enslaved African Americans here, but it plays a major role in the story of the Petersburg campaign and leading up to Appomattox. This became the supply center for the entire Union operation against Petersburg and Richmond. And I think you can see why. These rivers were completely controlled by the Union Navy. And so the supply line leading from Washington to Fort Monroe and then up the James River to City Point was totally immune to any kind of real Confederate interference. Now, City Point became important to Petersburg in 1838 when it was connected by a rail line running from here at City Point, the confluence of the rivers, into Petersburg, the head of navigation of the Appomattox River. And General Grant would use part of that railroad and then would construct a military railroad from here that ran 22 miles parallel to the entire Union line here. And the operation that existed at City Point was unparalleled on the North American continent from June of 1864 through April of 1865. There were more than 280 buildings here. There were a number of large wharfs dedicated to bringing supplies in. Nearly 400 ships were dedicated exclusively to supplying the Union Army here. Bakeries were capable of consuming or producing rather 100,000 loaves of bread a day. The Quartermaster General kept 11 million rations on hand here and 16,000 tons of forage for animals. There were railroad trains running back and forth from the front lines. Huge field hospitals here. The Depot Hospital could accommodate 15,000 patients at a time. So it's almost impossible to understand what this place was like. This was the nerve center of the Union war effort against Petersburg. And of course, General Ulysses S. Grant had his headquarters here.
All right, good. Thanks, Will. So I'm going to ask you to swap your mic over with our next guest. Before I bring him on, though, a couple of things. First of all, Will had mentioned how many buildings there were. That's a similar number of photographs that were taken here in 1864 and 1865. I imagine we'll be flashing some of these up now. Will also referenced something else, and that is that there were a lot of wharfs here, and a lot of the goods that had to come in to power the machine, the bread and all of the rations that they had and everything else to wage war was all coming in and out of there. And we're happy to have a good friend of ours coming on here. This is Jimmy Blankenship. Come on over here, man. Long time, for decades, he was at Petersburg National Battlefield, historian here. He's done a whole lot, and he is, in my opinion, Mr. City Point. So tell us about the the water operations and everything else along the bank.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Yeah, this was the largest supply operation of basically the entire war as far as in one place. On an average day, you could see about 225 vessels out here. It was about 40 steamers, 75 sailing ships, and over 100 barges could be seen out here on an average day. The U.S. Military Railroad consisted of two departments. There was the construction department and the transportation department. The construction department employed here at City Point as of the end of June 873 people. The transportation department had about 40. So the transportation department are the ones that actually operate the trains, the engineers, the conductors, all that type of thing. But then the 873 other people in the construction department were carpenters, you name it, they had them here. They would start building the wharfs around June 18th. They could not get here earlier because the pontoon bridge was across. They finally opened it up after most of the Union Army crossed the river, about 6 miles downriver from here. So when the railroad people arrived here, they did a survey, and the distance between the base of the bluff to the waterfront was only about 30 to 60 feet, so a very narrow area. They also would have to build out over a few mud flats to get to the channel. So they would actually build about 8 wharfs, which stretched along about a half mile of the waterfront. And they were building multiple wharfs simultaneously. The first wharf they started on was the railroad wharf because they had to bring in the locomotives and the rolling stock. So they would unload on they would use track barges. And these track barges would lay down with track, and then you just drive the locomotives and the rolling stock up onto the barges, and you could just haul them down by river. And then when they arrived at the railroad wharf, they could just start it up the locomotive, just drive on off the barge and go basically to Petersburg if they wanted to. The first train was carrying forage because what left City Point depended on what was needed at the front at that moment in time. So at that point in time, they needed forage for the animals. Grant had about 65,000 horses and mules that he had to feed every day. The animals alone would consume 600 tons of fodder every single day. Wow. There's no such thing as living off the land at that rate of consumption. Now, it was fairly peaceful and quiet here for the most part, but on August 9th, 1864, there was a tremendous explosion at the waterfront. Grant was sitting under the sycamore tree down here reading a newspaper. All of a sudden, kaboom, this was a tremendous explosion. About 80,000 pounds of powder exploded. They thought it could have been the carelessness of a dock worker. They also thought it could have been sabotage. So they really didn't know anything about how it happened until later. Now, Grant, here reading a newspaper, the eyewitnesses said that everybody was running away from the waterfront, but one person was running towards the waterfront, and that was Grant. He wanted to see what had happened. Here at his headquarters, several horses were killed. General Babcock had wounded his hand with something flying through the air. So in theory, Grant could have possibly have been killed in this explosion. Now, at the end of the war, they came across a report written by John Maxwell. He was a Confederate agent who worked for the Confederate Torpedo Bureau. And in his report, which he wrote in December of 1864, he explains how he did it. John Maxwell and his companion, R.K. Dillard, left Richmond, went east, turned south, crossed the James River, and then came up on the south side of the river like most of the other civilians were coming. They waited up on top of the bluff above the ordnance wharf, and that was easy to find because of all the limbers and caissons and artillery out there on the wharf. And this wharf was parallel to the shoreline, about 400 feet long. Maxwell said in his report he waited up on top of the bluff until he saw the captain of a powder barge leave the barge. That was Maxwell's clue. He went down to the waterfront. Keep in mind, he's dressed as a civilian, many civilians here working here. And he went up to the barge, and the guard confronted him. And he basically said, "What are you doing here?" Maxwell handed the guard this box, and he said that the captain ordered this box aboard. The guard did not look in the box, evidently, took the box down into probably the quarters of the captain of the barge. Maxwell and his companion went downriver a little ways, and as he phrased it, to watch the effect of their work. At about 11:40 a.m., August 9th, the explosion takes place. He had taken the inner workings of a clock, and he had added 2 little pieces to it. He added a plunger, a spring-operated plunger that had a percussion cap on the end of it. He put a percussion cap on the cone of the device, and the 2 accounts I have, one says it was 12 pounds of powder, one said 14 pounds of powder. So at 11:40 a.m., that spring snapped, the cap blew up, and 80,000 pounds of powder blew up. Now, black powder is slow burning stuff. Some accounts say the actual explosion lasted over 30 seconds. That's a long time for an explosion. Debris was thrown everywhere, as far as a half-mile away. A musket was thrown a half-mile away and landed in the City Point Road, buried to the second band. One soldier could not pull that musket up out of the ground. 43 people were killed that we know of, 126 wounded. Now, I'm sure more were killed. Keep in mind, the formerly enslaved African Americans had fled to plantations where they could, and they came here and they were working on the waterfront. I don't know of any muster rolls of these people, so we don't know how many were killed, but many were killed based on the descriptions. One popular lemonade salesman was killed by a saddle flying across the air. That's because some of the cavalry had turned in their old equipment to get new equipment. So there was a barge load of old cavalry equipment out here that was actually blown up also. So that's the ordnance explosion. After the war, once they found out that Maxwell had done it, supposedly, according to his family, they put a price on his head. He had a photo taken of himself. He's holding his head here and there's nothing up here. So basically he's kind of flaunting the thing, flaunting what he had done. So he did get away with it though. It was a legitimate military target, at least some people think so. And so he did receive the amnesty like everybody else did at the end of the war.
Good God, I could listen to you
It's
all
too
day,
much, isn't
Jimmy.
it?
This
Too much.
is great. Let me keep you on for another second here.
Sure.
I was going to give this to Will, but we'll bring him back in a second.
Okay.
Since you brought up Grant's headquarters already, we're looking at a cabin over there.
Right.
It wasn't like that right away. Can we walk a little bit
Okay,
closer
sure.
and you could tell us what's going on? Because
Yeah.
it's like as his operations grow,
Right.
so did his headquarters complex.
Sure. So General Grant did not use the plantation house. The plantation house had been shelled at least 12 times in 1862 during McClellan's Peninsula campaign. The house was not in great shape, so Grant did not use the house. The chief quartermaster for both armies, Army of the James and Army of the Potomac, used the house, Rufus Ingalls. And one colonel of infantry actually made a comment, as usual, the quartermasters have appropriated the finest residence in town. Grant, though, lived in a large hospital tent here. He did not plan to be here a long time. He did not want to have the appearance of a long, drawn-out campaign. So he lived in a large hospital tent initially, and he was still in the summer quarters until November of '64. Well, the staff started to complain about the cold weather at night. Grant was still adamant, we're not changing to winter quarters as of yet. Well, Grant had business in Washington for 4 days. He was gone, and while he was absent, the cabins went up. His was the first cabin to go up, and it cost $2,400 in 1864 to build that cabin.
Wow.
Seems awfully expensive. So Grant would use this cabin for the rest of the campaign. Abraham Lincoln was here on a couple occasions, once in June when it was a tent set up, and then again the famous Lincoln visit would be in March and April of 1865. So Lincoln was in this cabin. This piece of ground right here is the most important single piece of ground we have at City Point, because Grant conducted the war from here. He could tell all Union armies what to do. Lee was in command of one Confederate army. So Lee never had command of all Confederate forces until February 6, 1865, and basically there was nothing left to command at that point in time.
Great, and notice how Jimmy said this piece of ground. He didn't say this cabin,
Right.
because like Libby Prison, like the McLean house at Appomattox, there were plans to move these things all around. This one was in Philadelphia for a while, if I'm correct. Now, I'm going to ask you to hand your mic back over to Will, and then I am going to bring Will back on because we've got some fighting to talk about. We're introducing a series where we're going to visit a bunch of battlefields here, and I can already promise you that I'm going to do my best to end this video standing with the three of us, me, Jimmy, and Will, in front of there. We'll fight over who gets to play Grant. But Will, could you come back on and just tell us about some of the operations we're going to cover? I guess namely from late March of '65 up until April 9th and a little bit beyond that. What's going on in the armies?
Well, of course, as you know, Gary, the armies generally did not fight during the winter months, and not because it was too cold for the boys, but transportation was very difficult. Here in Southside Virginia, the temperatures in the wintertime seem to be above freezing during the day and below freezing at night, and the dirt roads in this area just turned to quagmires, and it was really very difficult to do any kind of major operations with wheeled vehicles in that type of condition. But by the late March of 1865, the roads were drying, and Grant was anxious to begin his campaign. He was always fearful that the smaller, quicker Confederate Army of Northern Virginia might escape him, and he wanted to try to destroy them before they could make their escape. And of course, that's exactly what Robert E. Lee had in mind when he made his attack on March the 25th at Fort Stedman. That was an attempt by Lee to force Grant to constrict his lines from the west to open an escape route for the Army of Northern Virginia to the southwest. That attack, of course, failed, and at this point, Grant was ready to launch his campaign. He has an incredible meeting, several meetings, but on March the 28th in this cabin and on the River Queen, President Lincoln's boat, Grant would meet with the president. He would meet with Phil Sheridan, who had come in from the Shenandoah Valley. He would meet with Admiral Porter, in charge of the James River Fleet here. He would meet with General Ord, the commander of the Army of the James. He would meet with General Meade, the commander of the Army of the Potomac, and he would meet with William Tecumseh Sherman, who had come up from North Carolina. What a collection of luminaries for the Union war effort. And if you stand here in front of this building, you can be in their shadow. It's one of the more awe-inspiring things if you're inclined to like the Union war effort here. All the luminaries were here. And as a result of those meetings, Grant was given the green light to begin his campaign, which was launched on March the 29th. And Gary, they fought at the Battle of Lewis Farm or Quaker Road on the 29th, which completely obstructed the Boyden Plank Road supply line for the Confederates. Then on March 30th was a rainy day, so the armies really couldn't fight. The roads were terrible. But on March 31st, Lee attempts to interdict this offensive by Grant, and he attacks Phil Sheridan's cavalry at the Battle of Dinwiddie Courthouse. At the same time, on the 31st, General Warren is fighting against General Anderson and General Bushrod Johnson at White Oak Road. And on April the 1st, Phil Sheridan, along with Gouverneur Warren, will attack George Pickett and the Confederate cavalry at the Battle of Five Forks, which opens the way to the last remaining Confederate supply line, the South Side Railroad. And with that victory at Five Forks, General Grant will issue orders on the night of April 1st for a massive attack along the entire Confederate line that will result in the destruction of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. In terms of its defense of Petersburg, Lee will send a message to Richmond telling the president that he hopes to hold on to the end of the day. He's not sure if he can, but he recommends that the Confederate government abandon its capital in Richmond. And on April the 3rd, both Petersburg and Richmond are occupied by Union forces, ending the 292-day campaign for Petersburg and launching the week-long campaign that will head to Appomattox.
Good, good. And this is going to involve some stuff. We're going to shoot some video, and we hope you really join us, and we'll share this stuff with your friends as we go to places like Sailor's Creek, the Wallace House, and Sailor's Creek. If you don't know what the Wallace House is, watch the video. Sailor's Creek High Bridge, Appomattox Station in Appomattox. So this is sort of a new series for us. We really hope you enjoy. And while we're hopefully tipping it up, but first let me ask you, Will, is there anything else you wanted to add, or are you good?
I just want to add that this is something that you all should come and visit, because the American Battlefield Trust has done a terrific job of preserving so many of these sites that you're going to be hearing about. And the trip to Appomattox is just magical. It's a part of Virginia that hasn't been overrun by development, so you can really get the feel of what those armies experienced during the first week of April.
Good, and we are talking about more than 3,000 acres at the places we're visiting, a whole lot. So let me say on the way up here that first of all, of the more than 200 photos taken in and around City Point include 6 of the most photographed dog of the entire Civil War. Some of those photos are taken right over there on the steps of the manor and in that driveway over there. But if you guys are willing to join me over here, let's set up this photo here. I'll hand my hat to maybe you, Jimmy. Wouldn't it be sweet if you could be Grant in the middle here? Okay. So, well, we are one of thousands of people who have come here and done this same thing. Oh my God, you get to see me hatless here. I think he was a little bit jaunty here. I guess I'm Rollins, and who's on the other side there?
I'll be Horace Porter.
All right, good, good. And here we are. Kris, thank you so much for shooting. Thank you guys for joining us today. And thank you all that everybody does for battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.